Hello, my name is John O'Connor. I work at Blackfriars Hall in the University of Oxford.
Hello, I'm Dr Clare Broome Saunders. I work with John here at the Blackfriars Hall at the University of Oxford, where I also teach English.
And we're going to be speaking about being respectful in debate, about issues to do with listening carefully, open-mindedly, and with empathy, also using emotional language judiciously, avoiding disrespectful or inflammatory language, and showing appreciation for good points made by others, acknowledging when they have changed our minds. And one of the things we're going to be doing is also reflecting on our own personal experience, where these issues have been very much part of what's going on. And when it has actually, when we've made mistakes in terms of debate, and when we have put these principles into practice and things have worked out much better as a consequence. Sometimes when I'm at meetings, I find myself, and there's something being discussed that's fairly difficult, I find myself wanting to jump in before the other person has finished. And so what I find is that I'm not listening really carefully to what that person is saying. I'm focusing more on what I am going to say. I have to make a really concerted effort in order to listen carefully. I almost say to myself, I almost address myself and say to myself that I will listen carefully.
I think that's quite a common situation, isn't it? Particularly if the matter being discussed is something that you're very passionate about, something you think is very important, is that you sort of keep saying your point of view over and over again and don't listen to the other perspective. I think it's always important to listen and to respond to what's being said rather than to just keep saying your point over and over again, because you need to be open to what the person you're speaking to, what their response is, so that you can develop your ideas. And it could be that in developing your ideas, you're still keeping from the same point of view, but you need the information and the perspective of the other person in order to do so as fruitfully as possible, I think.
I also think too, Claire, there's the importance as well of learning from mistakes. And sometimes I leave meetings and I think to myself, I jumped in too quickly. I might have been maybe a bit too forceful, or maybe the other person was too forceful with me. So I might be learning from other people's mistakes as well. But basically reflecting afterwards on a meeting or on some kind of discussion and saying, I wasn't listening so carefully then as I might have been. And I must try harder the next time. I must also have the presence of mind next time to remember that I had made that earlier resolution.
I think we've all been in those meetings where you keep thinking about it in the middle of the night because it's not been, you've said things you've regretted, it's not been as useful as it should have been because of the way you behaved in the meeting. And one thing that I find useful is to write down points that the person's making, so that you just a word or a phrase that the other person's saying, so that you can show that you're responding to their point and that you're not just using your own agenda and going forward with your own agenda. And that's quite useful. And if you pause and just take a breath before you respond, it just means that you don't continue that feeling of anger or upset, that you can just take a pause and breathe and respond. It can continue the conversation a bit more positively than it would otherwise have done, I think.
When it comes to something where you're having to listen, I think it's very important to make bodily gestures as well that show that one is, actually listening, to show that, almost to reassure the other person that they're being taken seriously. I suppose just by, saying nodding the head or the way one uses one's eyes and things of that sort can make such a difference. And I think often that person will speak much better. And also too, it helps me to, calm myself down if I'm showing kind of giving empathetic signs, and helps me then to respond more sympathetically and more constructively.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think empathy is so important because you have to think about how you would feel if you were being spoken to in that way, and so you're speaking to the person as you would like to be spoken to. So to think about that when you are speaking, because that means that the conversation is going to move forward. It's not going to be obstructive, because you're both showing respect. And even if a person who's not respectful to you you showing respect to them can calm them down and can actually move forward and be a useful way of communicating, I think.
Yes, it is a very good exercise, I think, if to reflect on those times when I have felt disrespected in a debate, and basically saying, what is it in that particular discussion that upset me, and how can I avoid doing the same thing to other people? And I would certainly think that careful use of language to avoid overly emotional language, or to avoid disrespectful or inflammatory language, is a very important part of that. Certainly, sometimes I have reacted really, really strongly to a particular word, or just the way that something has been phrased. Perhaps the other person didn't even mean it, but it has caused a reaction in me, and therefore it has caused the discussion to go off in a bad direction.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be very careful about the words you're using and about what those words might mean to the person you're speaking to. I think that's really very important. And I think it's also very important to treat the person respectfully. So, for example, one thing that I find really difficult is if I'm speaking to somebody in a meeting and they're on their phone. They're on their phone, so they're not actually giving me the attention. They're on their phone, or they're playing with their laptops, and that becomes very difficult, because then there's a barrier to communication that's not there before. But certainly, thinking about how you respond to somebody who you're disagreeing with, and how you phrase that is really important. But instead of saying you're wrong, I think you're wrong when you say that, think about a better way of saying it. Okay, I've heard your point. I've taken your point. However, there's another way of looking at it. And just to sort of, what you're saying is you're asking them to look at the point differently, but you're doing it in such a way that they'll come along with you, rather than sort of tense up and be hostile. People disagree. It's fine to disagree. You don't have to all agree, but how you disagree is really important, and the words you use is very important.
I must confess that sometimes when I have felt disrespected in a discussion, or when I have felt a little embarrassed, for example, by the other person, or where they've used some kind of very strong language that has triggered a reaction in me, sometimes I know inside myself that the other person might actually be right, but because I have been treated in a disrespectful way, I don't admit it to them. They might be doing the same with me. And very often what you find in discussions is that when one person makes one concession, the other person starts to make concessions too. And then often you meet somewhere maybe slightly in the middle, or even if you don't meet in the middle, the way that one holds one's position is a bit different and has been touched by the other person's point of view, their perspective on things, and it's usually improved by it and enriched by it, because it's a perspective on something that you just did not realize before.
Absolutely. Everyone comes to every situation with their own point of view, with their own perspective, with their own experiences, and it's useful to hear those, and it's useful to see that, and to acknowledge that actually you don't have those experiences. So they could well bring something very, very positive to the conversation, to the meeting, and to you, that you didn't even know existed, had never thought of, because it was a completely different point of view from the one that you're holding, or that the view in which you're looking at things. So I think it's very important. I also think it's important if somebody has said something, with a colleague or a family member or a friend, and says something to you in a way that you feel disrespected or you feel insulted, to acknowledge it, but to do so respectfully. So to say to them, when you called me that, I felt hurt, I felt upset, I felt embarrassed, I felt disrespected. So you're acknowledging it, so that next time you can move forward. Because it could be that the person didn't realise, that they did it just in the heat of the moment. They said something that they didn't even know they'd said it. They didn't know what the impact their behaviour was having on you. So I think it's important to do that, to move forward.
Everybody makes mistakes. And sometimes when, let's say, somebody has spoken to me about a mistake that I have made, where maybe I spoke too strongly or without sufficient respect, the fact that that person has really the respect towards me to be able to come up to me and say, look, what you said made things worse. It didn't help the debate. And I have to say, reflecting on it, probably that person is correct. And being able to get that kind of advice or that kind of steerage can help me avoid those problems in the future. So that person might be doing me a huge favour.
Absolutely, because it shows a level of maturity as well,
Yes.
and a level of trust. Because if you're trusting the person won't behave, if you're responding to somebody telling them how their behaviour made you feel, you're expecting them and hoping and trusting that they will change their behaviour in the future, that it will have an effect. So there's a level of maturity there, I think, as well.
I suppose it's the whole importance as well of showing appreciation for the good points made by others and acknowledging when and where they have got you to change your mind. I think this is a very important part of good debate.
I can think of lots of occasions where I have said things like, I never thought of it like that. As we were saying, everyone brings something different. Everyone has a different worldview. Everyone has a different experience that they're bringing to discussions and to conversations. And so, of course, they could enrich, they can enlighten, they can change potentially how you're thinking about something. But actually, even if you don't change your mind, even if the point is still the same, it's still enriching and helpful.
It's also very important too that when somebody else has acknowledged that they have changed their mind and they do that to you, that you are that oneself, that we respond well also. Because there's a kind of graciousness and a kind of respect to be shown to somebody when they have accepted, when they have acknowledged that they have changed their mind. Because even though it might at first appear a sign of weakness that they have changed their mind, in fact, as most people appreciate, it takes a lot of courage sometimes to admit that one has changed one's mind. And it takes a certain amount of bravery and a certain amount of maturity as well to be able to do so. And I think, as I said, most people appreciate that and understand that and can recognize that it takes courage to do so. And then suddenly the mood and suddenly the tone of the whole conversation can be greatly improved.
Yeah, absolutely. And you go away being better and positive about what's being discussed.